Heavenly Father, the greatest and best of all, the creator of all things, God, we give you glory and honor unto your precious name. And God, we desire to meet with you again. God, we desire that your presence would come and oversit this area. God, that your glory would come in as we lift up and praise your honorable name. God, there's no one like you. We have searched the heavens and the earth, and we have found nobody besides you, O God, who has the words of truth of life eternal. And God, I pray as we open your word today that we have a modern revelation of the things that occurred back in the time of the judges. God, what can we learn today as our society is quickly going down the toilet? God, as we have rebelled against your righteous standards. God, as we have ignored your holy command and writ. And God, today we come and bow down. God, we confess that we are the problem, not you, God, not your statutes, not your laws. But God, we long for that day when it's written on our hearts. We long for that day when we see your presence face to face. We long for that day when we are in your kingdom with a righteous judge. And God, where there will be no more rebellion. And God, we ask today, as we rend our hearts before you, that your Spirit would now come, God, and infill us and fill this place with your glory. We ask in Jesus' name, amen. As you open your Bibles to the book of Judges, last week we had covered the end of Gideon, how the beginning of his life was marked by some slight cowardice. Then he became courageous as God's Spirit showed him his future, as he received the prophecy and as his faith was strengthened. And then at the end of his life, he made an incredible statement that neither he nor his sons would rule over Israel, but rather that the Lord himself would lord over them and be their king. But Gideon fashioned out of the gold that he took an ephod, which became his downfall for him and all the people of Israel, as they prostituted, they whored themselves by worshiping the ephod. And it became a snare to Gideon, his family, and all of Israel. So in the end, he compromised. He could have had a dynasty. But before him, we had Abraham, after a great battle. He came and he offered a tenth of everything to the priest Melchizedek, the king of Salem. Abraham didn't keep the spoils of war. He said, I don't want them. Gideon kept some, and that's how he fashioned this ephod, and it became his downfall. Now, as we move into chapter 9, we know that Gideon now has 70 sons because he had many wives and concubines. One son in particular, Abimelech, was a son to a slave concubine. So, the understanding here needs to be through the line of Gideon, he was from Jacob, ultimately, right? However, through his mother, he was a son of Shechem. Those things are going to become important in this story. So we're going to talk about in chapter 9 the story of Abimelech, the bramble king. A bramble is a thorn bush. Now his name actually means, my father is king. Because, interestingly, Gideon refused to be king, didn't he? Gideon said, I'm not going to rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. And that is a noble statement. Right now, we have in this country a group of people on both sides who have offered up a potential leader. Both of them are consumed with ambition. And I don't mean godly ambition. We're going to see that this sort of ambition is not a godly trait. And we're going to see this in Abimelech. We see that the other 69 sons, they didn't want to rule. They honored what their father's wish was, and they did not make an attempt to rule over the cities in this area. And this is over all the house of Manasseh. So verse 1, Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, went to his mother's brothers in Shechem, because his mother was a daughter of Shechem. And he said to them, and to all his mother's clan, in other words, it wasn't the people of Jacob, Ask all the citizens of Shechem, which is better for you, to have all 70 of Jerubbaal's sons rule over you, or just one man? Remember, I am your flesh and blood. We're going to see this ambition. Why follow these other people who were really not ruling over them? They were not lording them over like warlords or anything, or tyrants. But this man had an ungodly ambition that was rising up in him. Remember, he's part from the tribe of Manasseh through Gideon, and part of the people of Shechem. When the brothers repeated all this to the citizens of Shechem, they were inclined to follow Abimelech. For they said, "He is our brother." And they gave him 70 shekels of silver, from where? The temple of Baal Bereth. Does that sound like a holy alignment right there? You go into a false god's temple and you take the gold and the silver from this Philistine god, this pagan god. And Abimelech used it to hire, as the NIV says, reckless adventurers. It's better to say vain, worthless, idle, wanton hirelings. You get the idea? They're vagabonds. These were men for hire. And they became his followers. And he went to his father's home in Ophrah, and on one stone murdered his 70 brothers, minus one, because one still lived. Now let me back up for a second. Let's look at the book of Isaiah and go to chapter 14 of the book of Isaiah. So we're going to Isaiah 14, verse 13. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, and I will raise my throne above the stars of God. And I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. And I will ascend above the tops of the clouds, and I will make myself like the Most High. Who are we talking about? Who? Satan. Satan. And Satan is demonstrating what characteristic here? What? Pride and, same thing Abimelech is demonstrating. Pride and arrogance, but what's the word we've been using here? An unholy ambition. I am going to put my throne above. There's an ambition. I want to go higher. We have a couple political characters right now want to say, I'm going to be the top. I'm going to be the man. I'm the one that's going to be ruled. Neither one really has the credentials to rule. Okay, hello? We don't have a godly candidate this year at all. Matter of fact, we don't have any candidate at all. So our country is going down the tubes very quickly. We can't even field a decent candidate. Here we have Abimelech with this kind of pride. Let's look at the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 4, verse 28. Daniel 4 and 28 starts out as this. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of his royal palace of Babylon, he said, Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? The words were yet still on his lips when a voice came from heaven. And this is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. What do you think God thinks about this kind of pride and ambition? Nebuchadnezzar got put in his place, and he spent 7 years as an animal in the fields because of his pride and arrogance until he learned his ways. Are you getting the feel for Abimelech yet? Let's lastly look at Matthew chapter 23. So we're going to bring this to the New Testament here. Matthew 23, verse 12. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Who does the exalting? God. So we must remain humble, not only before God, but before our fellow men. 8:23 of the book of Judges. I want you to remember this. Gideon told them, I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you, or sons. The Lord will rule over you. Abimelech is not honoring that. He is a son of Gideon, yet he did not even follow his own father's commands. That says something to us today. How many children are following what their fathers and mothers command? Or is it that the fathers and mothers are no longer commanding anything righteous? But we have children that are rebelling. We have children that are kicking against the goats. We have children that are like wayward cattle. I see Vashon chasing after his cattle. And when the wayward cattle goes, they're frustrating, aren't they? You try to pen them in, you try to go in them in the right way. You're trying to do something for their best good, and they just don't get it. Okay? So let's move forward. So here we have these hired, vain, worthless, wanton people who have aligned themselves because they were paid. I'm trying to think of the term that we use. Mercenary. They're hired vagabond mercenaries. And now they're going to move into Gideon's house and murder in cold blood. What does God say about murdering in cold blood? He's not pleased with it, is he? Matter of fact, the 6th chapter of Proverbs says one of the 7 things the Lord detests are what? Shedding of innocent blood. So now we have breaking of God's laws by Abimelech. Because when that pride and that ambition gets to that point, you'll start compromising everything. God's laws no longer hold meaning for you. His moral standard becomes shattered in your sight. It's no longer important. Much like we see in today's society, it doesn't matter that a police officer is a representative of the law. People are disrespecting that. They're not honoring their request. They're not complying with what they're asked, and their lives are being required of them for it. Okay? And we want to blame the cops. We want to blame the law. We do that with God too, don't we? We want to blame His law. But as we learned in the book of Hebrews this week, God's laws are not imperfect. God's ways are not somehow messed up. His ways are perfect. The only reason we had to have a new high priest and a new covenant was because of man's hearts. It was not the covenant, the first covenant, nothing was wrong with it. The original law, nothing was wrong with it. But man's weakness and inability to follow after God. Therein lies their problem. It's not with God, it lies within what? Our hearts. Okay? So we see this with Abimelech. Jerry, I want you to go to Habakkuk 1:11. And while Jerry's doing that, as we look at Proverbs, I want to look at this a little more closely just for one sec. Proverbs chapter 6. 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to Him. Haughty eyes, what's that? Arrogance, pride, a lying tongue. We've seen lying all over our hand. I mean, in our political candidates, they're always lying. That is deception. Hands that shed innocent blood. There it is. A heart that devises wicked schemes. You think Abimelech was coming up with a wicked scheme? Yes. Feet that are quick to rush into evil. See that here. False witness who pours out lies. And a man who stirs up dissension among brothers. Abimelech pretty much is blowing all 7 of these, isn't he? Jerry, did you get there? Habakkuk 1:11. We'll get to it. So his 70 brothers, it's really -1, his 69 brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, of Gideon, escaped by hiding. Then all the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo gathered outside and beside the great tree at the pillar in Shechem to crown Abimelech king. You there yet? The great tree at the pillar in Shechem. this is a very, very important thing, and we all will miss it. I've missed it. Why is this Tabernath at Morah important? Well, we're fixing to find out. This great tree was well known to the sons of Jacob, and it was well known in Shechem. You there, Jerry?
Then shall this mind change, and he shall pass over, and defend and refuse his power unto his God.
That's not my translation of Habakkuk. Yeah. It speaks of them being wicked and evil servants. But let's go to Genesis here, chapter 12, verse 6. We're going all the way back to Genesis 12. Verse 6. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of where? The great tree of Morah. Where's it at? At Shechem. And at that time the Canaanites were in the land. And the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give what land? This land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Where was that altar built? Right next to the great tree, the Tabernath tree, the oak tree at Morah, there in Shechem. So this was already a consecrated site to the Lord, wasn't it? It's a very important thing to remember. Let's move to chapter 35 of the book of Genesis and look at that. Chapter 35, verses 1 through 5. Then God said to Jacob, go up to Bethel and settle there and build an altar there to God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, get rid of the foreign gods you have with you. In other words, all their idols. And purify yourselves and change your clothes. Everything about false gods, he said, get rid of. Okay? Very important. Then come, let us go up to Bethel, where I will build an altar to God who answered me in the day of my distress, and who has been with me wherever I have gone. So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods, that is, idols, that they had, and the rings in their ears. Remember, who had the rings in their ears? The sons of Ishmael, remember? And Jacob buried them where? Under the oak tree at Shechem. So we not only have a consecrated site to the Lord, we have a place where false god stuff was buried there at that tree. So what would this tree represent? A sacred and holy site unto whom? Unto the one true God, unto Elohim. Okay? NIV. Okay, that'll work.
They sweep past like the wind and gone. They are deeply guilty of their own strength and their God.
Bingo. Okay? So these are evil, vagabond sort of men that he has hired. Okay? These are not good people that he's hired. Because he wants to have his own axe to grind through his own ambition and pride. And these things God does not call us to be about. Because our pride goes before a fall. Okay? And our ambition are not God's ambitions. When we start marching saying, I'm going to be the best preacher in the land, or I'm going to be the best evangelist that the world has ever seen, I am going to be the best orator of the laws of God, who are we lifting up? Ourselves. I mean, do y'all see the folly in that? And that's what Abimelech is doing here. He's saying his very name, my father is a king. Yeah, but his father said, I'm not going to be king. So he is now renamed the Bramble King, as we will see why in a second. When Jotham was told about this, he climbed up on top of Mount Gerizim, and he shouted to them. Here's another historical marker, Mount Gerizim. Very important. Let me turn to Joshua 24:25, right before the book of Judges. Joshua 24, verse 25. On that day, Joshua made a covenant. A what? A covenant for the people, and there at Shechem he drew up for them decrees and laws, and he recorded these things in the book of the law of God. And he took a large stone and set it up under the oak tree near the holy place of God. Are you getting an idea of what the oak at Morah, or the oak in Shechem, is all about? It is a holy spot for God. And this is where Abimelech decides, I'm going to be crowned an illegitimate king. Are y'all getting this? So now we have the one surviving son who had hidden. And he goes up to the top of Mount Gerizim, and he shouted to them, listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you. Listen to me. Why? So God may listen to you. And he's going to give them a fable. But I want to back up. Okay? So here we have, in the presence of the sacred tree of Morah, the very oak, right above it, you have this Mount of Gerizim. And you have Jotham, who means Yahweh is perfect. That is his name. And he's going to climb up into what today is a modern amphitheater. There is a valley between these two mounts, and we're going to see these two mounts are very important in Hebrew history. And he sets up on a triangulated stone, which is like a natural platform to preach from. And he begins to shout, which is going to be a prophetic utterance before his people because of what they have done. If we go to the book of Deuteronomy, and we go to chapter 11 of the book of Deuteronomy, we're going to be beginning in verse 26. See, we all know this, I'm setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if you obey the commands of the Lord your God that I'm giving you today. So how are they going to be blessed? Obedience to the word that was already given. We already see Abimelech is already breaking all the laws of God, okay? So he's not going to inherit the blessing. But on the other side of blessing, there is cursing, okay? The curse if you disobey the commands of the Lord your God and turn from the way that I commanded you today by following what? Other gods. He was paid out of whose money? The money that was given to Baal Bereth. Hello, false god. Which you have not known. In other words, you have not worshipped these gods before. When the Lord your God has brought you into the land that you are entering to possess, you are to proclaim on Mount Gerizim the blessings. So you see how Mount Gerizim is very important, because it's a mount of blessings. That's where it was shouted to all the people of Israel. And on Mount Ebal, the curses. As you know, these mountains are across the Jordan, west of the road, toward the setting sun, near the great trees of Morah, in the territory of those Canaanites living in Arabah, in the vicinity of Gilgal. You are about to cross the Jordan to enter and take possession of the land the Lord your God is giving you. And when you have taken it over and are living there, be sure that you obey all the decrees and laws I'm setting you for you today. So you have the Mount of Blessings, Mount Gerizim, and the Mount of Curses from Mount Ebal. Is that pretty clear? But interestingly, we now have Yahweh is perfect shouting out a prophetic message in the form of a fable from the very Mount of Blessings, which is ending up going to be a curse. Listen to me, you people and citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you. One day the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves. Who are the trees? They're the people. Trees went out to anoint a king over themselves. In other words, they didn't listen to God. The trees themselves, the people themselves, rose up to anoint a king. They said to the olive tree, be our king. But the olive tree answered, should I give up my oil by which both gods and men are honored, to hold sway over the trees? That is, to move or to wave the trees. In other words, to rule over them. Next, the tree said to the fig tree, come and be our king. But the fig tree replied, should I give up my fruit, so good and sweet, to hold sway or to rule over the trees? Then the tree said to the vine, come and be our king. But the vine answered, should I give up my wine, which cheers both gods and men, to hold sway over the trees? Finally, all the trees said to the bramble, or the thorn bush, come and be our king. And the thorn bush or bramble said to the trees, if you really want to anoint me king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, then let fire come out of the thorn bush and the bramble and consume the cedars of Lebanon. Are y'all seeing it yet? We have the people coming, and we have some trees, an olive tree, we have a fig tree, and we have a vine. We have Gideon, who could have been a rightful king, said no. It's not about him. The Lord will rule over. We had the other 69 sons of Gideon who said, no, we're not going to do this thing. But then they came to the thorn bush, the bramble. And the irony of this is, do you know what a bramble or a thorn bush means in Israel? Keith? Do you think you can get up under the shade of a thorn bush, a bramble? No! It sits this high. And so the joke is on the people. There is no shade under a thorn bush. There is no refuge in a thorn bush. Y'all getting this? You're going to get cut. You're going to get stuck. You're going to bleed if you try to snuggle up to a thorn bush. It's considered useless and worthless in Israel to even today. It's a nuisance plant. If you step on a thorn bush, are y'all happy about it? No. All right, we just cut a tree out of our yard which was full of 2-inch thick spikes. And I thought, it serves no purpose. It's useless. Even trying to cut it down, it cut the fool out of Alicia because I made her do it. But the truth is, it's a useless tree. This isn't even a tree. It's a bush. Now let's turn to Isaiah 9:18. We're covering the whole Bible, aren't we? 9:18 of Isaiah. Surely wickedness burns like a fire. It consumes briars and thorns. And it sets the forest thickets ablaze so that it rolls upward in a column of smoke. By the wrath of the Lord Almighty, the land will be scorched and the people will be fuel for the fire. No one will spare his brother, and on the right they will devour, but still be hungry. And on the left they will eat, but not be satisfied. Each will feed on the flesh of his own offspring. Manasseh, and that's exactly the tribe we're talking about, will feed on Ephraim, and Ephraim on Manasseh. Together they will turn against Judah. I want you to think about this. The imagery is fire. The imagery is judgment. It is destruction. And this is the same message we're getting here. Remember, it's destruction by fire. Because the thorn bush says, and let the fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon. Verse 16. Now if you have acted honorably and in good faith when you made Abimelech king, and you have been fair to Jerubbaal and his family, and if you treated him as he deserves, and to think that my father fought for you, he risked his life to rescue you from the hand of Midian. But today you have rebelled against my father's family. You've murdered. Innocent blood is on your hands, his 70 sons on a single stone. And made Abimelech, the son of his slave girl, king over the citizens of Shechem, because he is your brother. If then you've acted honorably and in good faith towards Jerubbaal and his family today, may Abimelech be your joy, and may you be his too. But if you have not, let fire come out from Abimelech and consume you, citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out of you, citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo, and consume Abimelech. Do y'all hear this? I mean, this is a very prophetic message. He's saying, you're going to kill one another, as he's pronouncing this prophetic curse, and the judgment will be with fire. Then Jotham fled, escaping to Beer, and he lived there because he was afraid of his brother Abimelech. What's Romans 12:3 say? Go to the book of Romans, chapter 12, verse 3. Says, for by the grace given me, I say to every one of you, Do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the measure of faith God has given to you. Do you think Abimelech was thinking more highly than himself than he should? Some of us are doing that today. I'm the such and such pastor of such and such church, and they beat their own chest and they beat their own breast. These are not the ways of God. Even Paul, who had the zeal, as we're learning on Wednesday nights about Saul who became Paul, who had incredible zeal for his faith in Judaism and his tremendous learning under Gamaliel, said, I count it all as garbage. Count it all as rubbish. All this learning, all this zeal that I thought I was doing the right thing for God. And it turned out it was really about me. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Who are you? I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Paul was building himself up to set himself up as the chief Pharisee of the land. And he thought, because of the zeal I have, I'm doing this for God. No, you know who he was doing it for? And we can get caught up into this, guys. That's the message here. We can get caught up in that we're doing all this for God, but in reality it's about us. What is the gift of heaven to us? What is the ultimate gift of heaven to us? It's Jesus. The ultimate gift is Jesus. It's Christ in us. It's not about how good we are or how pious we are. It's about Jesus in us. Then Jotham fled, and verse 22, after Abimelech had governed Israel for 3 years, God sent, that means he allowed Satan to bring an evil spirit or an evil countenance between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem who acted treacherously against Abimelech. God did this in order that the crime against Jerubaal's 70 sons, the shedding of innocent blood, might be avenged. In other words, this was righteous judgment on God's part. And this would be carried out on their brother Abimelech and on the citizens of Shechem who had helped him murder his brothers. In opposition to him, the citizens of Shechem set men up on the hilltops to ambush and rob everyone who passed by. And this was reported to Abimelech. In other words, the citizenry went above and beyond, and they started to rob passerby. So people didn't even want to go through Shechem because they were getting mugged. And it wasn't even Abimelech doing this. So there was a countermeasure that was going on. Now Gaal, son of Ebed, moved with his brothers into Shechem, and its citizens put their confidence in him. After they had gone out into the fields and gathered the grapes and trodden them, they held a festival in the temple of their God. In other words, the pagan temple. And while they were eating and drinking, they cursed Abimelech, and Gaal, son of Ebed, said, Who is Abimelech? And who is Shechem, that we should subject ourselves to him? Now look at what he's going to come against, the very lineage. Isn't Jerub-Baal's son? Isn't he Gideon's son? And isn't Zebul his deputy? Serve the men of Hamor, Shechem's father. Why should we serve Abimelech? In other words, doesn't he have the bloodlines of Jacob? Isn't he a Hebrew? He's not really one of us. I am a man of Hamor, Shechem's father. Okay? Why should we serve this Hebrew? If only this people were under my command, then they would get rid of him, and I would say to Abimelech, call out your whole army and bring them up against me. Y'all aren't getting this. Let's go to Genesis 34, and you will get it. Genesis 34, beginning in verse 26. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword. And they took Dinah from Shechem's house and left. The sons of Jacob came upon the dead bodies and looted the city where their sister had been raped. They seized their flocks and herds and donkeys and everything else of theirs in the city and out in the fields. And they carried off all their wealth and all their women and children, taking as plunder everything in the houses. And Jacob said to Simeon and to Levi, it's prophetic, you have brought trouble on me by making a stench to the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the people living in this land. We are few in number, and if they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed. But they replied, should they have treated our sister like a prostitute? So we have Hamor and Shechem, who had raped Dinah. Y'all got this? The daughter of Jacob? Okay? So therein lies the blood feud. And that is why we have this man, Gael, saying you shouldn't follow Abimelech. Verse 30, when Zebul, the governor of the city, heard what Gael's son of Ebed said, he was very angry. Under cover, he sent messengers to Abimelech, saying, Gael's son of Ebed and his brothers have come to Shechem and are stirring up the city against you. So here's the storyline. You've got Abimelech coming in hiding, coming up to where you have Gael, who is the new deal. So God is going to stir up, he's going to allow Satan to stir up this rivalry, this ancient rivalry between God's chosen, the bloodlines of Jacob, and the bloodlines of the people that tried to defile the daughters of Jacob. Okay? So there's battles that go on, and interestingly, as we go down, we have a double agent in Zebul who works for Abimelech, but he's kind of acting like he's going to be on the side of Gael. And they all pile up because of this battle. Abimelech's men come and surround the city. They come and they block the gate. So now Gael and his horde of Shechem is cornered. And they all hold up in a stronghold in the temple of Baal. Temple of Baal Bereth, verse 46. And when Abimelech heard that they had assembled there, he and his men went up to the mount, took an axe, they cut branches, and each man brought wood to the temple of Baal where they thought they were safe. They retreated to their God's refuge, and they thought they were safe. But at the beginning, the prophetic words were, they're going to be judged by what? Fire. So Abimelech and his men cut limbs, and they all go up to the temple of Baal, and they pile these limbs on, and what do? They light them on fire. Over 1,000 people died in the arms of a false god, in the refuge of a pagan god. Now, our God says he takes his pinions and his wings and he covers us and he protects us. He is our refuge. He is our fortress and strength. They didn't go with that. They went with the false god, and it was ultimately their downfall, so that the prophecy of verse 20 came true. Then again, Abimelech went further to the other people who had helped out this coup against him. And they locked themselves into their tower in verse 52. Abimelech went to the tower, stormed it, but as he approached the entrance to the tower to set it on fire, he's going to do the same thing, a woman dropped an upper millstone on his head and cracked his skull. And he called out to his armor bearer, draw your sword and kill me, so that they can't say a woman killed him. So his servant ran him through and he died. And the Israelites saw that Abimelech was dead. They went home. Thus God repaid the wickedness that Abimelech had done to his father by murdering his 70 brothers. And God also made the men of Shechem pay for all their wickedness. And the curse of Jotham, son of Jerubbaal of Gideon, came upon them. They shed innocent blood. Interestingly, as a side note as I close, 2 Samuel 11:21 is the story where David has Uriah killed. And as Uriah and the Israelite armies marched too close to the wall, the men of the city came out and killed him, and the army pulled back, and Uriah was killed and several of David's men. So the messenger that had to talk to David was scared, and the word that the leader gave him, it says, tell him that you went too close to the wall, just like what happened to Abimelech when a woman killed him with a millstone. So his name was forever remembered that a woman killed him. Remember we talked about last week, if a son killed the kings, it was an insult. Okay? Same thing with a woman. If a woman killed a mighty war hero, he was considered a wuss. Okay? And it was much like Star Trek and the Klingons. It's all about honor and dying in battle. Okay? All this macho stuff. But it was forever recorded that Abimelech was ultimately killed by a woman with a millstone. And thus, here's the point. God's judgments are coming. Okay? He's already decreed it. And when we walk in pride and arrogance, we're going to find ourselves on the wrong side of the mountain. We're going to be on the mount of cursings, not the mount of blessings. I don't know about you and your house, but I want my family to be on the side of blessings. I want to stay obedient. I want to stay humbled before a holy God. And all of you, as I've talked about, are called to be missionaries. All of you have a calling on your life. But when you make it about you, you'll commit the same sins of Abimelech. Clear? When we make it about God and we remain humble